Spring football starting here this week for the Georgia Bulldogs. I think that most of the starting jobs are locked up. Is it ever really locked up at Georgia? No, not according to Kirby Smart. I think they take that practice by practice. But if you go down the depth chart, there's been a lot of returning pieces, and Georgia, of course, is one of those teams that has a ton of depth, right, at a lot of different positions. So we know a lot of what we're getting with Georgia this year. But I think that there are a few position battles. I think there are still a few spots that we're fighting, that the players are fighting for. I think that one of them that I'm going to talk about is not one that's necessarily being thought about in a super deep way. Maybe I just haven't until this point. But on defense, there are a few things that they need to shore up. They need to get figured out. And that doesn't necessarily have to be figured out this spring. You'll have fall camp as well. But there's definitely going to be some battles, especially in the secondary. I think there definitely could be some defensive line battles. And on offense, I think that there are more battles than meet the eye this spring for fighting for a spot on the depth chart. So I'm going to run through a few of those. Ryan Curley from Dog Post here talking about the position battles that Georgia has in front of it this spring. Make sure you're checking out our newsletter in the description. That is linked down below in the description. Every single day in your inbox, you get all of your Georgia football news delivered to you. And you're going to want to be signed up for that during the spring, and especially with a big season coming up this year. Make sure you're checking that out, and thank you to those who are already subscribed to the newsletter. Let's start with the wide receiver position. Georgia went out and they got 3 receivers in the transfer portal, right? They went out and they got London Humphreys from Vanderbilt, Colby Young from Miami, and Michael Jackson III from USC. So they go out and they get 3 different types of receivers, all kind of bigger guys, right? Colby Young, a guy that is 6'5", could be a deep ball guy, could be your number one guy on the outside at that X position. And that is the position that I want to talk about. And it's the one that Marcus Osmey-Jacksaint essentially inhabited the last year, right, as kind of your number one guy on the outside. Ladd McConkey, a little bit of a gadget receiver, a guy that they could put in the slot on the outside, move him around. Brock Bowers obviously was a big-time presence for Georgia as a weapon on the outside, and another guy that they like to move around. But over the last few years, you've seen kind of a change at the guard there. A.D. Mitchell was supposed to be that a little bit, and he obviously kind of didn't play a ton for Georgia. He obviously did in big moments and made some big catches. George Pickens was this. Lawrence Cager was kind of worked as an outside receiver. I think that you're looking at your starting guy being between Colby Young and Ra Thomas there. I think that is the battle. Colby Young, what do we know about him? Right, a couple years at Miami, 10 touchdowns in 2 years, not super productive. Miami, a situation that Mario Cristobal went down there, and it just hasn't worked maybe as fast as it should have, and Miami hasn't really taken off the way that people hyped it up to a couple years ago. Well, Colby Young, he gets the offer to go to Georgia, and this is an offense that may be able to utilize him more, but he put up numbers, right? These aren't crazy numbers, but on a not great Miami team, 47 catches for 563 and 5 touchdowns is not nothing. There's not necessarily a lot of room to just be this huge productive receiver the way that Georgia plays offense, that plays very balanced and plays where they feed a lot of people, right, in terms of the run game, the tight ends, and the wide receivers. But Colby Young, I think he's going to be coming in and competing with Ra Thomas, who obviously has a year on him in terms of time in the program. He's also a transfer receiver just coming from Mississippi State last offseason, where, look, at Mississippi State, Ra was one of their main guys in 2022 when he got 626 yards and 7 touchdowns. He was one of their biggest pieces, and I think that he was starting to click with Carson Beck and become a little bit more involved in the offense as the year went on. He ends up suffering an ankle injury and missing the end of the season, missing the postseason. So he's got a leg up on Colby Young in terms of he's obviously been in the program and been in the system for a year longer and has been developing chemistry with Carson Beck for a year longer. And I do think that Ra Thomas has more experience in the conference, right? Playing at Mississippi State and now playing at Georgia. If he's healthy I think that he really started to come along, but I think that's a little bit of a battle there on the outside. London Humphreys, look, this is not no hate, but I just don't see where Michael Jackson III fits in this receiver room. I think he's another guy that they'll put on the outside, but out of what I've watched highlight wise, what I've seen numbers wise, and just from conversations with people around Georgia, I think there is a little bit more momentum with Kobe Young being a guy that will compete for a starting job. And at least that's a little bit of my prediction. And I think that him and Ra Thomas are going to be going at it for that. In terms of slot receiver and a guy that's going to play Ladd McConkey's role, you're going to look at Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett both doing that. And I think they're both going to be out there. So I didn't mention them. And this wasn't just being the number one weapon. It's more so being kind of that X receiver on the outside, a guy you can go to. And so I do think it's between those guys. Another thing on offense, so I'm talking about three different, and this is more of an all-encompassing with the offensive line. Watch out because I think there will be battles. All right, all you lose is Amarius Mims. You lose Cedric Van Pran. It seems like they're just going to plug and play Jared Wilson at that center position. A quote came out from Cedric Van Pran recently. I think he said it around the Orange Bowl, but talking about how much potential Jared Wilson had or has, and that he thinks that Jared Wilson could be a better center than Cedric Van Pran was than himself. So Wilson obviously been in the program for a few years now. He's been waiting his turn. He was the second string center last year. I think that he should kind of seamlessly move up on the depth chart, but look, you have Tate Ratledge return, right? And I think he'll return to that right guard position most likely. Xavier Truss returns, and that's where things get interesting because I think he's a little bit better of a guard than he is a tackle, but Georgia's got a ton of guards. Dylan Fairchild he earned a starting spot. Micah Morris, another guy that rotated with them at guard that proved that he belonged on the field. So they've got three guys there. Chad Lindbergh is transferring. Monroe Freeling, right, another younger tackle for Georgia. They liked what they saw out of him as well. So I don't think the offensive line is necessarily set at having everyone out there the way that it was at the end of the year. Ernest Green, left tackle, left guard Dylan Fairchild. Center this time would be Micah Morris. Right guard, that's Xavier or that's Tate Ratledge. Right tackle, is that just going to be the position that Xavier Truss takes over? Is he just going to resume that position at right tackle now that Amarius Mims is gone and there's no competition there? Georgia didn't really push Truss out, obviously, with him returning. So you would think that that's with the intention of him having a starting spot, but there's buzz around there that he's not necessarily the best guy. So I think we should be paying attention to what's going on with the offensive line. I don't think it's necessarily set, and they have 4 legit guys that can start at guard. So they've got some decisions to make there. Now, the blessing that they have with the offensive line is that they're so deep, then they have the ability to rotate. They can keep fresh legs. So maybe it's not a problem. It's obviously not a problem, but I do think they have some things to figure out in regards of who they want on the offensive line. Dylan Fairchild, I believe, earned a starting spot, but could Micah Morris beat him out for that? I think it's totally possible this spring. Tate Ratledge, All-American guard. I don't think he'll lose his spot. It will be interesting to pay attention to if the tackles remain the same and who they have at guard, but it looks like Jared Wilson will be the center. The last position I want to talk about is the safety spot next to Malachi Starks. They've got a lot of defensive backs on this roster. They brought in one from the transfer portal in Jake Pope, a safety who I think will be competing for that starting job. I think Ja'Cory Thomas, who will be going into his 3rd year in the program, right, as a former 4-star defensive back, I think he will be competing for that starting spot. I think Dan Jackson will be competing for that starting spot. So they've got at least 3 guys there. David Daniel Sisavon. So there's a few guys that are competing for those safety spots. Jonel Aguero is essentially competing for a spot as well, although I think they're going to end up placing him in that nickelback, that star role. They were kind of grooming him for that last year. And then you could look at the freshmen. They've got a few freshman DBs. Is KJ Bolden that good to where he could start day one? I don't know. They've got 5 stars, obviously. Is Ellis Robinson a corner that they want to push out there? And does that change the lineup? But really, I think this battle starts to come down to Jake Pope, Ja'Cory Thomas, and David Daniel for that safety spot. And Dan Jackson being around still, he's now the oldest guy in that room. He's played a good bit for Georgia. expect him to be in there on dime packages, if not competing for a starting job, because he has started games for the Dogs in the past. Those three positions. Look out for the X receiver, safety, and the offensive line. I think that there are some battles there.